Hello, 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 everybody. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending and choosing to spend your Friday night with us. I recognize, I think, a few of you from the crowd and from the streets, of course, and I'm glad to be welcoming new friends and old friends here today for this historic launch of the Trinity of Fundamentals, presented in its first ever English translation. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and if you haven't been here before, welcome to the People's Forum, and welcome home. On our facade and on our website, it says we're a movement incubator, but of course, what does that actually mean? It means that we are a community center, we are a political education center, we are an art space, we screen movies every Thursdays, we're an organizing space, and that welcomes people all across the left who are committed to working class liberation here at home and everywhere else across the globe. And this is all in the service of uplifting revolutionary working class culture and knowledge so that we can build our movements here, wherever we are, and here in the belly of the beast, and win, right? And so the People's Forum is also proud to be part of the Shut It Down for Palestine coalition. In partnership with the Palestinian Youth Movement, of course, calling for a permanent ceasefire, the release of all political prisoners, an end to the siege on Gaza, and an end to all U.S. aid to Israel. And so we are super, super excited. I'm excited because the house here is packed, and I know that the people are tuning in everywhere online. And this is a celebration for all of us, a celebration of Palestinian national revolutionary culture, and a celebration of you guys as curious readers and organizers who are here deepening your commitment to the Palestinian liberation struggle. And of course, 4 months into Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, it's only becoming more evident that we must strengthen and sustain our commitment for the long haul. And what better way to do that than to learn from someone who has committed their whole life to his people's liberation. And so that brings us here today to today's book and today's conversation on the Trinity of Fundamentals, if you didn't see it on your way in. Many of you probably have an idea of the story of how it came to be here, but we'll get into that a bit more as well. But it's based on the experience of the author Wisam Rafeedie's 9 years of hiding from the occupation. And this book tells the story of Kenan, the main character, as he is called by his party to live a clandestine life. He moves from safe house to safe house, through sickness, through lurking occupation forces, even breakups. And throughout it all, he remains steadfast in his commitment to his party and to the liberation of Palestine. But of course, that's easier said than done, of course, over 9 years. And that doesn't mean we don't see the trials that he faces living in isolation for nearly a decade. I know that I can't be alone for like a day. So. But through the challenges, we are given the opportunity to watch a revolutionary in formation. We see as he develops his revolutionary principles, he's constantly in dialogue with himself. As you guys read the book, you'll see that the book's actual structure lends itself to that conversation, to that formation of himself. And he's honing his life in becoming what he calls a professional revolutionary. And as he's doing all of that, the political landscape is changing around him as well. We see a revolutionary organization and a revolutionary movement adapt and change, recuperating when it needs to, but also responding to the people's needs, whatever they need. And his experience and his commitment is a treasure trove for us. It's a really opportunity for us to learn about Palestine, about what it means to take to the streets, to continue taking to the streets, to organize for Palestine, for our organizations everywhere. And he asks us an urgent question, which is, what are the essential aspects of a revolutionary life when it's pared down to it, right? When you need your necessities. And what does the revolution require of us? And will we be ready to take it on? And that's why it's really exciting to be joined. We're really excited to be joined by today's organizer editors who have helped develop the book over the past year and beyond. It's been a real labor of love. And first we have Danya Al-Saleh and Lina Asi from the Palestinian Youth Movement. Yeah, I know we have a lot of you guys in the house. But the Palestinian Youth Movement, if you aren't familiar with it, is a transnational, independent, grassroots movement of young Palestinians in Palestine and in exile worldwide, and is also an organization that is part of the Shut It Down for Palestine coalition. We're also joined by Leanne Fillahan, who is an editor for 1804 Books and also an education director here at the People's Forum. And so that's a lot from me. I'm going to ask for a little bit more time and ask our guests a few questions. But after that, we'll be opening up for a brief Q&A. So come curious, come with your questions, your reactions, anything you have for us. And then, of course, a couple of logistical things. There are masks at the front desk if anyone needs. And, of course, the book is available at the front for purchase. But without further ado, I'll take us into our conversation. How are you guys feeling today?
Excited.
Good.
Good.
So I guess the first question is kind of an obvious one, right? It's how did we get here? Having this conversation today, to be having this book in hand. You know, it's a very unique process that this book underwent to get to our hands today. It's, you know, a project presented by a political organization, also published by a very political press. And so, of course, we also have political objectives and political things we want to see forwarded by this book. And so I guess I'm asking you all to talk a little bit about the political significance of this novel. How has this novel found its way to us from Zionist prisons to English readers? Maybe a bit about the development of it, translation. But yeah, we can start there.
Maybe I can start us off. Hi, everyone. So I'm actually just going to maybe start with a little bit of context before I dive into the question. So at various junctures throughout the Palestinian history, Palestinians have experienced various forms of fragmentation, whether it manifests in the geographic, the political, or social context. And this is really a direct result of our condition as Palestinians in exile and the direct byproduct of Zionism displacing our communities across the globe. And I think this is really marked by the condition of our struggle of displacement and dispossession. And so the history of the Palestinian struggle is one that attempts to overcome this fragmentation, whether that's through organization and also having a transnational dimension that bridges together in attempt to overcome this kind of fragmentation. And so, you know, historically, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, played this critical role in maintaining the links between our communities wherever they exist through a shared political program, an agenda, and also through institutions that serve to mobilize, gather our community under a shared identity and a shared political project. And so, you know, what we saw after the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993, following, you know, the dissolution of these institutions and also the absence of the PLO of not representing the needs and the aspirations of the Palestinian people in relation to a liberation struggle. And so what we see because of that is the role of the diaspora is now severed from the struggle in the occupied homeland. And so now, in this context, Palestinians are forced to develop these institutions independent of a structure that connects us to our homeland. And this, for newer generations, presents new challenges of inability to connect culturally with our people back home, and also some of the linguistic barriers of not being able to read or to speak in Arabic. And so this condition of exile has also resulted in the severing of our ability to connect to the spirit of our struggle. And so this is really the context in which PYM has intervened politically in this moment to say that we have a responsibility and a role to rebuild this connection and communications with our community wherever they exist, and to be able to bridge these gaps that we identified across these different areas. And so the hope is that with this story, that our youth here in North America are able to connect and able to see themselves in Wisam's experience through the character of Canaan, and be able to have access to this revolutionary history that they otherwise might not have access to. And so just for a little bit more context around the Popular University, which is the PYM's Political Education Committee, there are two central questions that have guided the development of our political programming. One is around what is the history of our struggle, and the second is what is the political role of the diaspora. And this novel addresses these two questions directly. And so for us, we do not, study our history for the sake of learning it. That's not the only reason. We engage in political education to be able to develop strategies and to develop tactics to be able to transform our situation. And in moments like this, where contradictions are heightened, to say, like, what are the opportunities that present themselves for us to be able to build on our movement's power. And so I think this novel offers us the political clarity and also the tangible experiences from Wisam.
I can share a bit, like the story of how did the novel get liberated from Zionist prisons, and then how did it end up in PYM, what the process looked like. One thing just to know and to like constantly remember when you're reading this text is that the existence of this novel, both in Arabic and in English, it's the result of collective work and struggle. It's like organizational work from the beginning to where we are now. And it's, for us, like in the PYM and the Popular University, we really see this novel as the result of a series of victories, small and big. And some of which is tied to the prisoners movement, and this is why we have this novel now. So Wisam wrote this novel in 1993 in Naqab prison, 2 years after his 9 years in hiding when he was captured by the Zionist forces. And we had an event here at the People's Forum in April of 2023. I believe, and it's online, so you can learn about how his story of the novel there. I have some pictures and video and stuff I can show, if we can pull it up. So yeah, this is from back in April here, and there's Wisam on the screen. And then if we go to the next. So a friend of the movement actually created a video really synthesizing that event and the story. So we're gonna show it just to give everyone that story. So if we can play it.
Ready when I say this is one of the most important and powerful books coming out this year, and you should do yourself a favor and pre-order it now. By Palestinian political prisoner Wisam Rafeedie. And let me just give you a brief synopsis before I tell you how this book was written, because it will absolutely blow your mind. So the book follows the story of a young Palestinian, Canaan, during the 9 years he spends hiding from the occupation between 1982 and 1991. Now, this is a time period in Palestine marked by major historical and political events, and Canaan takes us through his journey marked by struggle and isolation and liberation and love. What makes this novel so compelling is that it is inspired by Wisam's real-life experience organizing and struggling against Zionist occupation and oppression. Now, here is where things get awe-inspiring. Wisam wrote the novel while he was in the Naqab prison between 1992 and 1993. It was at the encouraging of his fellow Palestinian comrades in prison that he even wrote it down. After they heard the story, they insisted that he needed to put pen to paper. And he kind of went back and forth on how to do it and ultimately landed on what is essentially autofiction, a fictionalized account of his real-life experiences. As you can probably imagine, writing the story had to be done in secret and extremely carefully. There were constant, frequent cell searches done by Israeli prison guards, and what other Palestinians in the prison would do during these cell searches is that they would act as monitors. They would take as many pages of the novel as they could, wrap it in dough, and then wrap that in plastic wrap and toss it to other sections of the prison. They'd call this a fax. Part of the reason that they were so careful with each and every page is that Wisam refused to rewrite anything. He wanted every page to be full of fresh, raw emotion. He didn't think that rewriting anything would capture the same feelings that he had when he was putting them down on paper for the first time. As the book was being written, it was being shared around the prison to all the different organizations, and it was very well received. One day, there was a cell raid, and the monitor who was throwing the fax didn't throw it strong enough, and it landed directly in the hands of an Israeli prison guard. This was a devastating blow because, remember, Wisam refused to rewrite anything because he didn't feel that he would be under the original influence of the emotions when he was first writing it, and therefore anything rewritten would not be the same as the original. Wisam was released from prison only to be imprisoned again 54 days later, this time in Ascalon prison. Now, what is crucial to understand is that education was and is central to Palestinian life in prison. Palestinians fought hard for their right to education, organizing one of the largest collective hunger strikes in 1992 for that right. After Oslo was signed in 1993, books and libraries were finally allowed into prisons, but education was still an uphill battle, and a lot of the hard-won victories of the 90s have been reversed in the 2000s. But still, all the while, Palestinians self-organized, teaching and learning from each other about rights and resistance, devoting themselves to their education. Now, this is where things start to get even more wild. So in 1997, a representative from Wisam's organization comes to the prison where he is to deliver a course to him that had originated in Nafha prison to get his opinion on the cultural program. So Sam is looking through the course list, and what does he see but the Trinity of Fundamentals, his book. He reaches out to his comrades at Nafha prison, asking how they got the novel because he had never copied it down anywhere, and remember, it was confiscated by Israeli prison guards. And it turned out that a comrade from Gaza had read the novel while he was in Naqab, which is where Wisam had written it, liked it so much that he had copied it down himself and took the trouble himself to smuggle it out of prison. Now, smuggling it out is no small task. He had to have put all of the pages into separate capsules, swallowed them, and then smuggled them out. And now, 4 years later, after the novel had been missing for all that time, the book was now on its way to Wisam via 4 comrades and 52 capsules split between them, hidden in their intestines. Those 52 capsules contained the novel in its entirety, which became very popular in prison discourse. Even after all this, it wasn't smooth sailing. Wisam was transferred to another prison, Tel Mond, and this time he had to smuggle all 52 capsules himself, which he did by hiding them in secret pockets in his briefs. It was while he was at Tel Mond that he decided to publish this novel publicly rather than just have it circulating in the prison circuits. His comrades in prison let him know that there was a crack in the visitors' room where copybooks could be snuck through. So Wisam copied down the novel onto 3 copybooks, tied them around his waist, and then, while a fight ensued as a distraction, snuck them through the crack to a comrade who was waiting on the other side after leaving the visitor's room. That novel was printed in Ramallah in 1998. For that novel to end up with us here now is a testament to Palestinian steadfastness and struggle. For a year and a half, the Palestinian Youth Movement worked hard to bring this text into English for readers across the world, and every step of the way they made sure that the translation captured the spirit of the original text. It is genuinely such an incredible story. The path that that novel had to take just to get into our hands, that alone makes it worth reading. I have the pre-order link up in my bio, so please go pre-order. And if you are in New York or any of the surrounding areas, there's going to be a launch event and panel on February 2nd, which coincidentally is my birthday. So show up, pre-order the book. You do not want to miss this one.
So the thing to really take from this story is like from every process of this novel, it's about his comrades and organization, like everything from the decision to write it to the ability to write it to its circulation internally to the way it got out. There's another picture. Next one. So this is actually an image of close-up image of capsules, and in the dedication, Wisam talks about the 54 capsules that 3 comrades, it's a very labor-intensive process, undertook to transfer the novel between 6 prisons, and then of course there's the story of getting it out. So throughout, it's a testament of like the prisoners' movement, collective work, and I think one thing to really take is that, of course, the content of the novel is revolutionary in and of itself, but like it's actually the production of it is revolutionary as well. It's not just the content. And this is like for us in the PYM, we're really proud to just be even like a tiny part of that story, of this legacy. And just to share a bit of the process a little bit more, back in August 2022, we voted at our National General Assembly to do this project for the Popular University to undertake it. And we composed a group of 14 members of both of the Popular University and people just in the PYM. And it's like we're speaking on behalf of this group, but this is 14 people total who represent like a variety of different skills and like brilliance. There's people that are experts in Arabic literature and language, in in Palestinian history, writers, editors. It's just like a strong group that dedicated hours week after week after week to work on this project. So we had a translator, a professional translator, Dr. Tutunji, and he would give us chapters, and then we would review. And the process, it's like hard to, it was a very detail-oriented process. Like it's a labor of love, very like close attention to everything from like what needs to be known for people to navigate this text. So like if you look through the book, there's a bunch of footnotes, there's a glossary, there's a cast of characters. We also like just debated like words, like the level of words, the level of where to put commas. Like one example, we debated how the words we should use to describe the shoes of the occupation, because this is like a big analogy in the text. So we fought sneakers or athletic shoes. Like it was a big debate. But like I think the bigger, and if you go to the next photo, we also had a retreat here actually, and this was days of just working on the text. And then after that, we decided to do it again, another round of reviewing the text. But the thing I think the bigger picture of this is like, we were struggling over what does translation mean, and in some ways in the sense that like Lena was talking about, like this is about bridging gap between like being in the diaspora, like in exile across generations, being detached from revolutionary Palestinian revolutionary knowledge, and like how to actually capture the story. And we're really proud to be here today to talk about it.
I can just say a few words on 1804 books as a perspective in this process. And when you say it was an honor for PYM to be part of this translation, I mean, it's an incredible honor for 1804 books to be able to contribute and witness the process and also contribute and publish this book. I mean, the story of the production of the book itself is enough to show what essential and fundamental text this is, and it goes beyond just being a text. At 1804 Books, you may have seen some of the books that we've been publishing and that we hope to get into the hands of many readers. And for us, revolutionary literature, theory, history is extremely important for many of the reasons that were already raised. But I think just as Lena and Dania were describing the kind of severing that the Palestinian diaspora has experienced over the past few decades, I think that's actually an experience that this generation has gone through overall. I mean, there's, especially here in the United States, in the English-speaking world, in the Western Hemisphere, there's a severing of the younger generations from our own revolutionary histories by design. There's been a campaign, a strong campaign, to make that severing possible. And so when people are joining struggle, joining movements, being moved to act or being moved to join a collective organized struggle, there is a gap of knowledge that can only be transferred by the human experience. Like who do we know, which revolutionary elders can we go to and say, how did you make your decisions? How did you deal with these contradictions? How did you deal with these difficult moments? And so a novel like this, I think maybe speaks to why the revolutionary prisoners in the occupation's jails would actually sacrifice so much to make sure that it survived. Because it's not just a piece of text, it's actually a way to make sure that people can, there's a continuation between revolutionary experiences that can reach the collective and that can reach the new people who are joining, and that people can actually be steeled by these experiences. And so the fact that we are able now to spread it to not just the Palestinian diaspora, but to generations of people who are struggling across the world, who can't read Arabic, who can't speak Arabic, but will take from this experience something that's going to help them grow, that's going to give them that kind of revolutionary guardianship in a sense, someone to consult, someone to talk to, someone that you can relate to. Canaan is in many ways serves this. And this is a tradition that even in the text is talked about. I mean, Soviet novels, revolutionary novels from across the world are something that have been very important in feeding the spirit of struggle itself and giving people an an understanding, something to help them as human beings. We all have our human contradictions, and I know we're going to talk about it more, but we all have to make decisions as human beings in the struggle. And we can memorize all the dates of our past, and we can read every volume of Marx and Lenin that there is, but then who do we talk to in order to resolve our emotions? And in a sense, this book gives us everything. It gives us history, it gives us theory, and it gives us that kind of companionship, friendship, and something to inspire people during the difficult times. And so actually, one of the comrades from PYM was reminding me that the first time that we talked about this book was on a bus in revolutionary Venezuela, where we were learning and struggling through many different questions about, what has been the revolutionary process in Venezuela, and then we were talking about the Palestinian struggle, and she said to me, hey, we're thinking about maybe translating this book. Do you think 1804 Books would be interested? And I was like, yes. And so the seeds are planted, and it's kind of beautiful that the seeds were planted in a revolutionary context, because everything from the genesis of this book in Wisam's hands, and then its production in Arabic, and then its collective political translation, because I think that's so important. It's a collective book, it's a collective experience, and so to have this process, that's really a revolutionary process of translation, be what has produced this book in English, is just so incredible, and it's really exciting that everyone is going to get to read it.
Yes, I can't stress how excited we are that you are all here and that we can all celebrate this, this incredible novel, its incredible journey. Even in the book itself, he has constant references, like Leanne was saying, to Soviet books, to culture, to songs. He's like, songs are so central to his experience, his secret life. And I'm glad we can all be here to celebrate revolutionary culture, but not only the spirit it gives us, but how it moves us to action. And so I know we've talked a lot also about this gap that Palestinians experience, given like systemically that they are in exile. And I think we can also experience this gap temporally, culturally. We talked a little bit about the process of translation, but ultimately this book was written more than 25 years ago now in a very different political and cultural context from us today. And I was wondering if you guys could speak a bit to the challenges, but also the opportunities that this bridging presents us with, both in translation between languages, but also translation between political context, from 25 years ago in Palestine to maybe, if you're reading it in New York today.
Yeah, I can speak to a few aspects of like how we struggled with translation and some of the conclusions like we came through the process. So the first is, and we've all talked a little bit about this, it's like translation across historical periods. So, for us in the PYM and in the Popular University, translation is actually a political practice. It's a political practice of bridging this gap in diaspora due to exile and due to Zionism. And this gap is like all sorts of things. It's lack of exposure and access to like revolutionary knowledge. It's through language. It's generational. And Wisam actually has an introduction that he wrote for this translation, and he talks actually about what is this translation doing, and for him, and I think like for the PopU and PYM we agree, it's an effort to link between two generations, and he's clear this isn't generations in like the sense of lifespan, like Gen Z, Boomer, Millennial, like, and he even says this is neoliberal propaganda, like this isn't how to understand the relationship across generations. For him, it's generations in the sense of historical periods. So like he was shaped in the 70s and the 80s. This is the time where he developed his ideological convictions. It's a very different time than when we are like emerging. For a number of reasons, like we exist in this context where there's an effort to actually suppress revolutionary knowledge, revolutionary ideas, and Wisam talks about it. It's like it's this period after Oslo. It's a period where, in the place of revolutionary ideas, it's like individualism, it's liberalism, it's like market values. This is like what we are given. And so we're trying to bridge, this is like what the translation is about, is bridging this context and bridging the skills and the knowledge in this book, like thinking of it as like a tool. The other thing to think about is particularities. So like, of course, it's from a particular context. And like when while you're reading it, I really appeal to you to not get overwhelmed by some of the details. Like, of course, it's from a particular time and place. It's pretty thick, the footnotes. So like, don't get overwhelmed by that. Like, treat that as a way, like a tool to bridge between the particularities to the general, which like, for us, we see this as a novel that teaches us about like, what does the Palestinian struggle mean? Like, yes, it's a different context, but the struggle, it's the same forces fighting against the same enemy for the same goal, liberation. And so this novel is a story of that. And then finally, just one other point is this novel, it's about Wisam's experience in hiding. So how to translate inner contradictions, like how to make that clear. It's a very vulnerable novel. It goes into like into the psychological depth of what does it mean to be in struggle, like this, how to navigate the sacrifices that are made in that process. And so there's many voices going on in this novel, and we worked with Kate and Lan on how to actually give voice, like basically like translate that in the novel. So that's something as well to think about. And I think, yes, it's a story about a young man in the 80s who has his own like particular struggle, but the bigger picture to take is like it's to push us, I think, to really struggle with our own contradictions and like the relationship between inner life and like external life. Yeah.
I think maybe just to add to that a little bit, it's important to note that like throughout history, like previous generations have had to grapple with different political or social questions, and I think this novel gives a lot of insight around the questions that comes up for the party, that comes up for Canaan, whether it's like through the interpersonal, like social questions, but also again, just more broadly around shedding some insight around what our revolution was really grappling with at the time. And I think just because knowing that like a lot of the readers that are going to read the novel maybe might not be Palestinian, might not be Arab, and are not maybe familiar with some of the political nuances relating to our history, but I think even more importantly is like some of the cultural pieces of like exposure to Palestinian culture and how that really informs the politics of our national liberation struggle. And so I think the footnotes or the endnotes in the book are very detailed, and even the process in which those footnotes were developed was also through dialogue with the members that worked on this book to reflect the accuracy in terms of the Palestinian history or in things that are in reference to Palestinian culture, whether it's like imsakhan, for example, of like explaining what that Palestinian dish is, and the significance that that actually carries in the book. And I think also around, you'll realize that clearly Wisam is very ideological as a Marxist, and so in the Arabic version uses Marxist terminology, and even that was a process in which we had to engage in discussion to say, okay, how are we translating this word? Like, for example, like in the final analysis, like that's something that in Arabic is consistent across, Marxist literature, but to make sure that it's translated in a way that still retains the political spirit in English. And so I think that was definitely like a challenge politically to make sure that the spirit of the novel is retained and what Wisam is trying to communicate is retained in the novel.
Oh, just a little bit to add. I mean, the process of translation was a feat in and of itself, and I actually think that this is something that will become a methodology for political translation going forward, because there's a literal translation, but that doesn't necessarily give neither the voice of the character, because this is a literary piece, and then the political meaning, because to translate political experience from Arabic to English is like a huge feat. So it's really incredible that this was done by the PYM. I think another element of it too, and you'll see when you read the book, we had to get really creative, because in the book itself, Canaan is telling us he's going forward and backward in time. He's going in and out of different levels of his consciousness. He's reading letters. He's reading party directions. He's talking to himself. He's talking to the walls. He's talking to his comrades. So there's a lot of you're kind of in his mind in a sense. And Wisam had to translate his experience into text, which he did brilliantly, and I can actually understand the rawness of it. It's very raw, and to edit an experience like that seems impossible. So it makes sense, his insistence on not editing or doing more drafts. But then to translate that experience again into the English language in a way that for the English reader would flow was really interesting. So we used some different formatting things you'll see to kind of help the reader go through these different levels, whether it's past or present, whether it's his inner self, his revolutionary self, his deep subconscious, the battles he had inside himself, and then when he, spoke out loud, to kind of take you into this maze of the experience of being in clandestinity, but more importantly, going from someone who wants to be a revolutionary to someone who is a revolutionary, and that process that it took, and the struggles that he had along the way. So I think also, I would say, we all read it, I don't know how many times, but it's something that can be read again and again, because every single time you'll find something new, whether it's more historical context, more exposure to Palestinian political culture and revolutionary culture, but then also what it means to become a revolutionary and the path that we have to choose and take to get there.
For sure. Yeah, this book presents so many opportunities in education. Like, again, PYM and the editors have worked so hard to make it a resource, a historical resource, but also, retaining that spirit of it, existing as a novel. I read it a couple times. I learned about the Gulf War. I didn't really expect to learn that immediately in the novel, and I boldly thought to listen to a podcast about it afterwards, and I was not quite ready. But it did give me the courage, It gave me the spirit to become curious about this region, to become more curious about the Palestinian liberation struggle, and to learn more. A novel is a beginning part. It gives us a lot of questions. It gives us a lot of emotions. It gives us a lot of experiences that prompt us to take the actual concrete steps we can to sustain our work in this movement. I thought we would be remiss to not read part of the novel, at least during our discussion, just to give you guys a sneak peek. It's not too much of a spoiler, I hope. But this is just a part where Canaan is experiencing the occupation literally knocking on his door. They're threatening to come in, and he's thinking a lot about his experience in his isolation, but also, well, actually, I'm just going to read it, and then it will explain itself. Okay, it starts. They're knocking on the door. They were wreaking havoc on his homeworld. That which had eluded them for years and years had become fair game for their ugly, heavy combat boots. His life, which had been a secret even to those closest to him, was now revealed, and here they were desecrating it. Wherever they stepped, he could feel them stomping over the years of his past, years in which he lived outside their grip and in the service of the party and the struggle. But now the restraints were wrapped around his wrists and feet, confining his movement and freedom. His wrists had once served as his tongue, allowing him to articulate his actions and efforts, and his feet had enabled his pacing from wall to wall as he pondered and lived the struggle. The blindfold prevented him from seeing his friends, his books, his pens, the doors, the walls. His home had been a liberated territory in the midst of an occupied land. He had exercised authority over this territory, and it intoxicated him day by day until a sense of confrontation engulfed him. I actually realized I might have introduced that a bit wrong. They have already made it past the door, and he is bound and blindfolded at this stage. But it introduces this interesting concept, right, of even after 9 years of isolation, he has felt that his home has been a liberated territory. He hasn't felt confined, and only now, in the face of the occupation, physically trapping him, physically holding him, does he actually feel confined. And I was wondering if you guys could at least speak to the sentiment of, perhaps the importance of why he doesn't doesn't feel alone, even in his isolation. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's just one thing to give as context about that, like that passage and what you were describing, is that the decision to go into hiding, it's actually, to understand it, you have to understand that it marks a particular juncture in the Palestinian struggle where after 1982, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, is exiled from Lebanon, and so there was a decision made like for the homeland to become the central front of struggle. And so but how do you do that in a context where you're constantly under threat of arrest? So this is a decision made to build organization and institutions and not go to prison, essentially. So that's the choice that Kanaan makes. And it's, for him, he constantly is talking about it actually as like rebellion, an act of rebellion. It's rebellion against the occupation. But he also talks about it as like madness at the same time. Like it's a form of isolation that's like incredibly difficult. And he's open about that. He talks about like, it's really unnatural to eat meals alone. Like this is like early, it's really difficult for him. There's months at a time where he's really not talking to anyone and he can't even have the lights on at night. So there's all these aspects of isolation that are abnormal. But for him, like what's more abnormal is the occupation. Nothing is more abnormal than that. So like, there's moments where he'll compare it. He'll compare it to being in prison, or he'll compare it to like there's a neighbor woman that, I don't want to give spoilers, but he kind of compares himself to these different people. But the difference for him is that he's outside of the control of the occupation. So for that reason, like this is a form of liberated territory, even though it's so difficult and even though it's so abnormal. And there's a passage actually where there's a moment where he says, when does he feel the least isolated? It's actually during the First Intifada. And this is where he relates his space to the masses. And there's a passage, I'll just read. He says, disappearance and evasion, an act of madness, little understood by quasi-revolutionaries during the late 1970s and early 1980s, had been transformed into a collective experience, undertaken by an entire people. They refused to surrender, running away from the quarters and rural areas to the mountains and the alleys the minute their homes were raided. This act of rebellion had become the choice of the people as a whole. So for him, this is like how to understand that. Like, this is where he felt the least isolated, is during the First Intifada, even though he wasn't on the streets, because everyone was treating the occupation as abnormal and resisting it in that way. And I think just one thing about the significance of this and the passage is that this is a form of struggle that still exists and this is what's special about the novel. We little understand it, and it gives us insight into it. And it's in a context like in Palestine, where in other contexts, there's bigger countries, there's more places to hide. He's hiding in Ramallah. So this is something as well to like understand.
I think what it also speaks to, and what's really central throughout the novel, and what Kanaan embodies, is what it means to be a professional revolutionary and what it means to dedicate your life to struggle despite these inner contradictions that might exist within you between the human and the revolutionary self, and of course the conditions that are presented by the occupation and Zionism. But I think also around what it means to be an organizer outside of a revolutionary moment or context, and the mundane, the everyday, and the sacrifices that it requires to be a revolutionary, is to sacrifice, these needs, these very basic needs and desires that everybody should, have and experience. And I think despite the fact that he's able to sacrifice, I think shows his commitment, and I think the only way that he's able to prepare himself for this moment is because of the accumulation of experiences that he's had over the 9 years that looked very different from the beginning to the end. And I think it's through the accumulation of these experiences and the mental kind of preparation and the dialogue that he has between his human and inner self prepared him for that moment to be able to, withstand the occupation. And I think just shows the ideological conviction and principles that he embodies throughout the novel.
I really love also the framing of it's the occupation that's abnormal, not the isolation or the revolutionary activity. And I think what struck me reading his experience and his grappling with the isolation is it creates a contradiction that is a strong fight. Like he's fighting against the desires, which are normal human desires of being with the people you love, of being in society, of doing the things every day that we often take for granted, eating with people, walking around freely. To make that choice to go into isolation, the book really shows you that it's not something that you can just kind of say you're going to do and that anyone can do. It's a serious choice. But through that struggle, those contradictions that he has to struggle through, he creates a new way of understanding himself in the world, and he becomes something new, and it's something that I think may be very relatable to people who've also made a choice about how they're going to relate to the world that they're in. Are we going to accept the conditions that we're under as normal? Or are we going to say, actually, it's abnormal, and the normal thing to do is take responsibility for it and fight with everything we have to change it? And to take responsibility, too, for the liberation of people around us. And that's what we can all aspire to what he's showing us in that sense. And it's interesting, too, to think about the isolation, because he's isolated from some of these very human things, but then he's put into something collective much bigger than him. He becomes even more accompanied by his organization, by the revolution, by the struggle, by his people. And so you see like these concepts transforming through his struggle. And I'm really excited to see how people feel and interpret and think about these things in relation to other contexts. Because like you said, this experience of clandestinity is in Ramallah, which is a small urban area. There's been many other experiences of clandestinity and other revolutionary struggles in countrysides, but also in other small urban areas. So there's things that we can think about when we are looking at different kinds of revolutionary contexts, but then also just the concept of making that choice of, am I going to step away from the normal routines of the conditions that are around me right now and go into this organized collectivity that is going to actually make you lose certain things, but then gain something much bigger. I hope that makes sense. But I hope everyone reads it too and sees their own interpretation of this struggle to create a new understanding of the self and the collective. I think it's a treasure that the book takes us through.
Amazing. We've talked a lot about its context, its past, where the book is seated, but also the process of this book started almost or more than a year ago at this point, and of course a lot has unfolded since then. So I was wondering about how you see the novel's significance in this historic moment, of course, as we're watching what's happening in Gaza, and how did your understanding of the novel transform over time?
Yeah, so my own understanding of the novel didn't necessarily change, but I think reaffirmed a few things for me when I had first read it over a year ago. And I think the most important thing is that it gave me vocabulary and frameworks to be able to understand my own inner contradictions and strengthen the convictions that I have. And whereas before, when I read it over a year ago, I think it just reflected a feeling, in a general and broad sense around things that I think all of us, struggle with. And I think, the internal tensions that Canaan experiences, I think any organizer can relate to, and that we've all had to, juggle these tensions that ultimately requires sacrifice. And I think, I could also relate to the experience of the tension between romantic optimism and the difficulties of the conditions, whether it's our own individual conditions and that dictate our lives, or the condition of the struggle more broadly. And so that that understanding that living this kind of life as an organizer involves it involves a true cost, and for our people, that cost is, the loss of land, the loss of life, and the loss of freedom, and that this really transcends like any political moment, but this was made more real for me since the start of the genocide in Gaza. And I think for many of us, these crystallizing political moments, whether it's the invasion of Iraq, whether it's the previous wars on Gaza, or the Unity Intifada in 2021, but this is, I think, where a lot of these feelings, these really complicated feelings come into play, and we're forced to reconcile with this, but ultimately as an organizer means you're rising above this and, stepping into action and to, struggle for a better world, like Leanne just said. And I think, in this moment especially, I think is really complicated and a lot of people are really struggling with, because on the one hand, we feel so much pride in our people's resilience and ability to resist Zionism and world imperialism, but also seeing the gravity of the despair and the grief that our people are feeling, and seeing thousands of martyrs, our people maimed, and millions displaced. And this is something that I think is not easy to see, and is really difficult. But I think reading this novel following, October 7th, I think helped me kind of process in this moment that it's, of course, like we need to have space to be able to grieve and to feel these complicated emotions. But this moment, more than any other moment, requires you to really step up and to seize the moment. And I think there's a quote that I think really resonates with me around romanticism, and I think this is something that all of us are guilty of when we organize, of like romanticizing the struggle and not fully understanding like the gravity and the conditions that we face. And that Canaan says that romantic imaginings of revolutionary actions are good. They're fantastic when you want to write a poem or you want to write a song, but it's not adequate when you're teaching somebody who's going to take up revolution as a profession, because they'll realize romanticism is one thing and revolution is another. And so I think that, just really, really resonated with me. And I think even in this moment, that's really difficult for us to really, grapple with, that we need to maintain revolutionary optimism to fulfill our commitment to struggle for liberation.
Great. And I have like a final question and a half, but then we'll open it up to everyone else. But yes, I guess this novel, I mean, one thing we can say as the publisher in terms of how it's changed for us over time, this novel is coming out at a moment when so many people are becoming committed to taking to the streets, to constantly speaking out for Palestine, for wearing their keffiyehs every day. And that commitment is one that people are learning about, they're experiencing, they're wondering what that will look like. And this, of course, is in a different condition, in a different time, but it is asking the very concrete question of, what does the revolution ask of us? What will it ask of us, and what do we need to be able to take on and do in the spirit and with the goal of liberation? Because we struggle to win, right? We struggle to win. And so in that vein, I guess I want to ask you all about what you hope people will take away from this book. If people read it and take one lesson from the novel, what do you hope that is? And also, what do you hope the novel's impact is on the movement at large?
Okay, I have a lot of hopes. Well, one of the hopes was achieved because is being achieved, because I want everyone to read this novel. And so I'm so glad that the room is full and that there's been interest, so much interest, and I hope that everyone can share the novel with their friends, their comrades, their families, Because I think that this novel is going to be nourishment for the movement going forward. And I mean, if I can give like maybe 3, because we're in Trinities. One, I think this novel is one of the best ways to understand what the steadfastness of the Palestinian people actually is. And we're witnessing it right now, and that is a very complicated thing to witness, like Lina has said. But it's not new. It's what has allowed us to survive for over 75 years under this brutal occupation backed by the richest and most militarily powerful forces in the world. And how can this small nation actually, the steadfastness of this small nation be right now the center of the struggle against imperialism for the entire world? And I think this novel really gives us a deeper understanding of what that actually is. It's a slogan that we hear, it's something that we reference, but it's something that is very complex. It has a gravity that is difficult to fully understand with all of the limitations that we are facing right now and the obstacles that we're facing right now. And so this novel breaks through many of those limitations and I think can help send that message to the movement that's also going to have to be steadfast in all the ups and downs that we're going to be facing, especially if we're ready to advance. And like Kate said, we're ready to win. And I also hope that this novel helps people who are in the movement right now, who are activating and who are trying to build the movement and dedicating and committing themselves to it. I do hope that it helps people fall in love with the struggle, and not in a romantic way where you suddenly don't see any of the flaws and you idolize it, because I think that is a trap that a lot of young people fall into, where we idolize the revolutionaries of the past, or the revolutionaries that seem like the big figures on the horizon, but fall in love with it in a sense that we commit to it and we commit to the changes that it's going to produce in us. And the novel itself can be something that I hope feeds people as we all go through those contradictions and those trials and tribulations that sometimes can feel all-encompassing. And like every piece of literature, it gives a sense of what it means to be a human being in a particular context. And the context that Canaan is in is one that is just conditioning our struggle today. It is the context of revolutionary struggle, and if we're going to advance that struggle, we need to look to and ask and talk to our comrades, whether they are on paper or in the past or in the future or around us. So I hope that this book helps people fall in love, not just with the concept of the liberation struggle for Palestine, but the revolutionary struggle overall, and that it gives us food for what's going to come forward.
So mine kind of, I think, builds well on yours, because for me, like, Canaan represents, like, endurance and strength. Like, it's, of course, there's struggle, but at the end, it's resolve. And I think the takeaway that I'd hope people get is, like, how do you get that? Like, where does that come from? And one of the places that comes from is actually ideological conviction. Like, this is something he says, like, a number of times. And there's a quote that I really like, where we discussed it a lot in the Pop U, actually, we referenced it a lot, is he says, man has immense potential expanded by ideological conviction. Either we rise to the challenge of the revolution or we don't. The collapse of our determination will defeat us before the enemy does. So like this moment requires like strength and like endurance. And so for him, he's saying, okay, where does that come from? It's through ideological conviction. That's what expands people to do that, to have that endurance. And so the story, of course, it's through, how does he get ideological conviction? Of course, it's through the practical experience of going into hiding. That's a big part of it. It's through that, it's through the party, it's through all these things, but it's actually also through study and like in a really like serious way, and study of revolutionary thought. gave up going to university, and this is something he like struggled with, but then he decided, okay, I'm gonna make this experience be a school. It's gonna be a school for me. And like throughout the novel, we mention literature and all this stuff. So he's reading literature, he's reading theory, he's reading history, and he's reading it in not just like absorbing it, he's like struggling with it. And it's all through difficult times. It's all through like not easy times. So he's doing that. When he's having low points, his comrades, what do? They come with books. Like they give him novels, they give him stuff to read. And so I think this is something, like it's a lesson, like we're in the thick of it and it's like difficult and we need endurance. And even, it doesn't have to be separate, like we can, while we're struggling, like do that work. And I think one key point is to do it in a way where it's not just absorbing and regurgitating it, it's in like an actual, like engaged and like really serious kind of way. And with that, I really hope people read the text together because like for me, my experience reading it with the Pop U after we went through the process was like the best experience. It was like reading it with my comrades and talking about all these different things. So I hope people read it in groups.
I think for me, the lesson that I got, and I hope others, extract from this novel, is the same kind of lesson that I learned after I read Ghassan Kanafani's Return to Haifa, is that in the final analysis, a man is a cause. But I think, this novel and Wisam takes it a step further to say that actually a revolutionary, first and foremost, is human. And I think you'll learn that through the novel around the contradictions that he has between his inner and human self, and that, in the first part of the novel, or the first part of when he goes to hiding, the first few years, the I and the ego voice is one that is complaining a lot, that's hesitant, that's like questioning the decision that he took up. But then you'll find later into the years of hiding where the voice, the I voice, becomes one that's elevated and is aware and is firm in his principles. And I think that's definitely like something that I resonate with, and I hope others do as well. And that ultimately there are these two personalities that exist within Canaan, the inner human and the revolutionary, and that exist within all of us, and that it's the responsibility of the revolutionary to sew the threads between these two personalities together. And that what I hope that this novel offers the movement is political clarity and tangible experiences to relate to, that the Palestinian struggle, of course, not only for Palestinians or Arabs, but for all of those who believe in the Palestinian struggle, that it offers political clarity. It tells us who the actors are in the maintenance of Zionism and world imperialism, and who are the ones that are resisting and confronting that. And I think strengthening your commitments to the Palestinian struggle, but to the broader revolutionary struggle. And so, yeah, I hope that's what inspires people.
Amazing. Thank you so much to our speakers, but also now we're ready to take a few questions. We have a mic runner. Yep, Sadi over there. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll get you. I see a person over here. And, Angie's here too. Great, amazing. Yeah, why don't we take a few at a time, maybe like 3 at a time? Something like that? Okay, cool.
Hello. Thank you all so much, and to Wisam for bringing this forward. Thank you to the Space, People's Forum, and Palestinian Youth Movement, and 1804 Books. I have a question about, we've talked a lot, or heard a lot about the story and the writing, and I really appreciate how art has played an important part in the revolution and in the movement for liberation. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the cover. I see a Palestinian flag, and I'm curious to know more about the cover and the art and how that came about.
Maybe I can take a stab at it, and then yeah. Okay, right. Okay.
Raise your hands high because it's a packed house. And be brave.
Do I need to stand up? Oh, okay. I'm gonna sit. I was, as I was listening to you guys talk about the book, I was really, you know, you said it was like a tool to kind of communicate between generations, like revolutionary ideas. Was there, I guess without giving any spoilers, was there anything like specific that stuck out to you that maybe you were, oh, okay, I'll stand up. Was there anything specific that stuck out to you that you were able to kind of like feel like you, okay, I've walked this path before, maybe I can understand the feeling, what's going on here. But yeah.
And maybe one more?
Hi, thank you for doing this. This is amazing, and I'm so looking forward to reading this book. But I just have a basic question. Where and how is Wisam a Rafeedie now?
Why don't we start with those for now, and then we'll do another round or two.
Okay, so I'll let you speak on Wisam. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the cover. I mean, the cover is very intentional, and our comrade Hannah really put a lot of thought into this concept. And you can see, well, first, there's multiple things here, but I mean, I think you can look at the cover and draw your own symbology from it. And I'll let you also speak to it from the Palestinian Youth Movement as well. But you can see the main thing here that I want to talk about is the window, which the window is designed in a way that it looks like it could be a window. You're not sure which side of it you're on. And it also could look like prison bars. And the path of light that you're seeing, is it a path of light in the darkness? Like, what exactly is it? Are you inside? Are you outside? The window itself is a portal, and I think when you read the text, you'll see kind of struggling with this concept of inside and outside. Inside the occupation, outside the occupation. Inside the prison, outside the prison. Inside hiding, outside with the masses. And it's a contradiction that is kind of consistent throughout the book, and that really, I think, is important to look at it seriously and see think through also what it means for the revolutionary to be dealing with this. Are we inside, are we outside the struggle? In fact, stepping outside the struggle, we're getting more inside the struggle. It's all like it's complicated. And then, of course, the Trinity, the key, the right to return, the olive branch, the Palestinian national culture, and a connection to the land, and his prayer beads, the strength and the steadfastness. But I'll let you all speak to that more. Maybe we can deal with the other questions.
Yeah, I mean, no, that was fantastic and not much to add. I think I'm grateful that you brought up like the role of art and culture, and I think, you know, historically has played a really important role in national liberation movements, because we know that national liberation is like the political expression of a people's culture. And so you'll see that, you know, in the borders around the novel, the key, and some of these Palestinian symbols and what they represent, that, you know, art and Palestinian cultural production represents, you know, of course, the aspirations and the feelings of our people, but also symbolizes, you know, things that we have lost. And so, of course, like you have the key here, which symbolizes the Palestinian right to return, the belief that, you know, we will return to our homeland. And then, of course, the olive branch and the Palestinian flag. And so I think some of the thought process around this as well was to reflect these symbols that hold a lot of meaning for our people. Yeah.
So I think that covered it really well. The second question was like something that we shared, like rather than like bridging, like what we saw, we immediately related to. There were a few things, but like one that actually I feel like really stood out in our both in the translation group and in the Pop U reading group is the beginning of the novel. It's a lot of the politics. It's beginning at the university. It's a student struggle. So he has this really brilliant categorization of youth, actually, and like why and how to categorize them and how to understand their future. And this is something we, like, all of us, I think, we related to it. But there's those that are committed. They have ideological conviction. They're gonna continue after graduation. And then he has revolution until graduation. So they're like, and then there's the third type, which is like they could go any direction. So it's they're either their connection is tied to a personal connection. So like that's part of why they're in revolutionary struggle. So it might continue after if that relationship continues, or it might transform into their own ideological conviction. So there's an openness to that. But that categorization, I feel like it resonated with a lot of us.
I can say something that maybe Kate also, since you also were reading and working on this book, want to add to it. I mean, I think I love that categorization. I think many people who've already seen that have said, okay, we need to bring this to the student movement and have everyone reflect. But I think another thing that's really interesting is that I think immediately stuck out to me is his struggle with receiving instructions from his organization that he kind of didn't want to do, and that would require him to suffer and having to make a choice. Do I choose to to play the role that I'm being asked to play, or do I choose to do something else that it would be more immediately gratifying and fulfilling? And I don't want to say more because I don't want to give spoilers, but I think anyone who's been part of an organization has gone through that contradiction, where we have to do something that's uncomfortable, or we have to do something that is scary, or do something that actually we just don't like. But in the process of doing it, you develop yourself in new ways that you never thought that you could do. So I think that is presented very early on in the book, and that I think everyone who has been or is part of an organization that's in struggle will immediately relate to.
Mine is a little bit more trivial than that, but he has a really beautiful relationship with his mother throughout the book. And you think a lot about how food sustains you, how eating with someone else sustains you. But there's this line, I think I left it as a comment at one point when we were editing Danya, where I was just like, I was gonna try to find it, but it'll probably be impossible, where he talks about his mother, and he talks about mothers in general. And he says mothers in general can't help but deliver you the same message over and over and over again. And this is like, across times that she's visiting him, she's always nagging him about like gossip, or she's telling him about gossip that's going on. It irritates him. She's giving him the same message of like, oh, like, do you know how to cook this? Do you have this? Do you want a chicken? Like things like this. My mom's maybe not offering me a chicken, but there are these very human relationships within the book that remind you again, the revolutionary is a human first, and those are things that you have to grapple with. That they sustain you, but also sometimes they complicate your life and your relationship to the revolution. But yeah, that's one of the things that I thought of immediately. But maybe the question.
So the question about Wisam, he's based in Ramallah in Palestine. He's a prolific writer. He writes a lot for different outlets. If you want to, I really recommend, there's many ways to read the text, but my recommendation is don't read all the prefaces. Read Wisam's and then read the novel and then go back to the other prefaces. So you can also learn about how he thinks about this project now as well. But another thing is Wisam's family has a history also in the US and has been really a big part of the Palestinian struggle in the US as well.
Okay, maybe a couple more questions. Hands up high. Cool. We've got two over here. Anyone over here? Oh, okay, there's a lot.
Hi, so my question is, what are the Trinity of Fundamentals? What are they? The three things? Yeah.
It's a fair question. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I can't really follow that, but I was gonna ask something a little bit different. First of all, proud of everyone who worked on this. It's It's crazy to see this happen. Lot to be said later, but I'm curious about the original text in Arabic, where it was circulated and how it was received, whether in Palestine or the rest of the Arab world. Yeah, that's my question.
Also, I saw a couple people raising their hands over this way to make our mic runner run.
Actually, it's not a question because I read the novel, but I wanted to comment on the Trinity. It's the revolution, the woman, and the life. And as I see from his perspective, the woman was his mom, the one who was always able to acknowledge and keep in his life. And she was always the one who, like, never asked him for stop, or, you know, like, maybe she asked as a mom, but she never was like as an obstacle. The other thing that I wanted to add is how, when he was talking about how the revolutionary understand life and how he became that human, when he was able to like delete the difference between the apple and the stone. Like, I don't know how we can relate apple to stone, but the revolutionary see the life as the nature. I agree, maybe because he is a Marxist, his perspective for nature, we are human, a part of nature. We care about the stone because this stone might has a life in it, like ants or whatever, you know. So we as a revolutionary, we aren't live in dark. We are obvious. Our enemies always hiding and hates life. And thank you all for this great project. We all proud of you. Thank you.
Is there a second hand?
Yeah, maybe over there.
Sorry.
Hi. Oh, okay. Thank you. It's a great effort. The translation, the whole process is really great. I have a couple of questions. When you say a revolutionary, a professional revolutionary, I have a little bit of a hard time understanding that. Number two, was there, since we didn't read the novel, was there a part where it talks about the people of the arrested people or the political prisoners? They are part of this experience too. Is that also, I mean, apart from his mother, the whole family gets involved in the process? So I just have another question about that. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with those.
Maybe I can take a stab at the first question around the Trinity of Fundamentals and what those are. It's important to give clarity around that. And thank you for the primer on that. Yeah, don't need to explain too much. So the Trinity of Fundamentals are, yes, life, love, revolution. And these are the secret laws that really guide Canaan's hiding over 9 years. And you'll see that throughout the novel that these three elements come up in throughout the novel, and sometimes they're in contradiction with each other. But those are, yes, the three secret laws that guide his life. And it's a play on, Christian theology around the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But for Canaan, it's life, love, and revolution. And the family is representing his community and his people, and of course his mother, who becomes sort of the only contact that he has with the outside world, and sustaining him by feeding him and visiting him and keeping him company. And then you have love, which is of course the relationships that he has. And then revolution, which is represented by his party and his struggle. So you'll see again that throughout the novel, there's going to be tension between these things, and you'll learn how he reconciles these three things.
I'll try to answer the second question about how it's circulated in Arabic. I don't remember the exact dates and stuff and story, but it's maybe 98, 95, but Syria first, and then Ramallah, like a publishing house in both. And in terms of its reception, also like if somebody wants to speak to this more in the audience, but it's known among the left, broadly in the region, and then of course the prisoners movement, like it's a part of the curriculum of the prisoners movement.
I guess I'll attempt the last question, the question of professional revolutionary. And actually it's interesting because it's raised in some of the prefaces, which I agree you should read after you read the novel. But by professional revolutionary, we don't mean someone who has a career in revolution necessarily, someone who goes and does 40 hours a week of revolutionary work and has a degree on it and can speak to it with a title. I think what we mean by professional revolutionary when we're saying it here, and what Kanaan is forming himself to be, is someone that your entire life, everything that you do in your life is done with the objective of advancing the revolutionary struggle. And that can mean decisions made around your personal life, decisions made around the way you live your life, the way you relate to other people, the way that you organize anything else that you do. You may have another job and then you are doing other things, but that is not your career. It is the decision you make about the contribution that your life is going to leave on this earth. And what you're going to do every day, you wake up and you say, okay, how am I going to advance the struggle today? And Kanaan, in the novel, you can see that he's in many different conditions, and oftentimes having to struggle with that question of how to be a revolutionary in these different conditions, moving around, dealing with new obstacles, new challenges. And so I think it's something also that people who are committed to struggle in any context have to figure out. How do we actually be the best give the best contribution that we can give to the revolutionary struggle, no matter what the conditions are around us? And if we need to learn new skills or become comfortable with new things, how do we do that? And that's where the professional comes in. And I think that's why the word is used, because we have to actually get good at it and get better, and we're working towards it. And then the question of the people around those who are imprisoned or those who are in hiding, if I understood the question correctly, the book definitely deals with that. And I mean, the focus is on Kanaan, but we hear from his mother, we hear from his comrades, we hear what he's thinking about the people that he loves, who he maybe can't be with, or that he's thinking about. And the decision that he made doesn't just impact him, and that's very clear in the novel, and you see him grappling with that, which is true of all the families of the imprisoned or the revolutionaries. Or when you take this task and make this decision, it doesn't just impact you. It impacts everybody around you, and then you're impacted also by themselves. So I think the novel does a really good job of charting that kind of those interactions, and hopefully will stimulate a lot of reflection and debate around similar experiences that the readers will have.
Just add, like one thing to note is, yeah, there is a social life, but everyone in his family besides his mom doesn't know he's even alive or where he is or anything. And it's actually true of most of his party as well. Like it's a small group that knows about him, and he has a comrade who is his like big support, and Hisham, who like really represents what does it mean to be a comrade. So it's a small circle, but it's social and alive, but very, very tiny.
I think we'll take maybe one more round of questions, and then we'll have some final comments from us. Oh, okay, there's a lot in the back. Saidi, I'm challenging you. Thank you.
I thank you all so much for all your hard work. I'm excited to read the novel. My question is relating to the mentioning of music. You mentioned that Wisam liked songs and music, and it reminded me of a section that Fanon writes in Wretched of the Earth on national culture, where he mentions that music is a big part of national liberation struggles as well. So with that in mind, I guess, can you just comment a little bit more on his relationship to music or to songs in that context.
All right, second hands, and then third.
Hi. Just a quick question on the translation aspect. So I'm really interested in how this works because I have Pakistani parents, but I grew up in Scotland, so I always have my parents telling me that they can't translate something exactly. So I've always been interested in this idea. I know something is translatable, but I just know it requires a certain amount of work. So it'd be good to understand it almost in a flowchart kind of way, that you go from origin A to destination B and all the little moves you have to go through. It'd be good to understand that more.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could speak about like the genre of Palestinian prison literature more broadly, and kind of what you see this book's contribution to be within that kind of larger genealogy, whether it's the autofiction part or something else. But yeah, I was curious about kind of that broader context.
Great. And I think we also have a question over on this side.
Hey, sorry, I'm behind the pole. Hey, I just wanted to ask about, you spoke in the beginning about the break in our connection to revolutionary history, theory, knowledge. And I just wanted to ask how you see that impacting our movement today and how this book acts as a way to resolve that loss.
Yeah, let's take that as our final question and then maybe some final remarks too.
Maybe I can start with the music and feel free to build on this. So I think, yes, like culture is very important to, of course, Wisam, but to the character Canaan. And you'll see that revolutionary culture, whether it's in the form of literature, like Layan and Dania spoke to earlier, or whether it's in the form of music. And one singer who comes up a lot in the novel that could basically be a character is Sheikh Imam, who's like a real life singer. And for those who listen to Sheikh Imam, a lot of his lyrics, speaks to oppressed peoples, to the revolutionary masses, and lots of revolutionary songs like to Palestine. And this is one way that he develops himself as a revolutionary through the political sort of messaging in these songs, and reaffirms his commitments as to why he took up the choice that he did, why he took up the life that he did. And he finds a lot of comfort in that, especially when you're in isolation. It's definitely something that I do, is like listen to music to like process things. And so I think that's a coping mechanism, but also a form of education for Canaan, and also like Fairuz and a bunch of other singers that we all know and love. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah, some of the group created a Spotify playlist of the songs. There's that many. I can do the translation one or try, and others can jump in. So like I said, we had a professional translator. We'd get the version. We had people that were tasked with more fluent in reading the text. So they were reviewing like word by word, sentence by sentence, the direct translation. And then there were some of us that were more like editing the actual text. So there were those of us that were like, this doesn't make sense in English. And then we would speak with the person that is like close to the Arabic. And then sometimes that would result in a struggle, because there was I'd say a contingent that were like, this has to be direct, like we have to word by word have that kind of translation. And then there was the opposite spectrum that was like, we have to do stuff to the translation to make it resonate in English. And I think we like had a kind of in-between like process. Then there were also phrases that it was like we fought over how to translate that are difficult to translate in English, like Allah yirda alayk, like how do you translate it? That's a big phrase in the text. And so there was a group that said, well, may God be pleased with you, it's too literal and it doesn't make sense in English. And then there were those that, what was the other one? God bless you. And they were like, well, it's not God bless you. And it was a fight for months. Like this was back and forth, back and forth. And to be honest, I don't know how it was resolved. Like you'll find out which one we went with, but it was a it was a struggle. So that was how it looked. And then we had a second process. After that kind of very detailed process, we improved actually over time. We got a lot better. And we learned each other too. Like we got better with each other. And especially after the retreat, I feel like that a lot was resolved, like just being together, because we were all over Zoom doing this. And so the second stage was a lot more, we were stronger and more confident, and I think we knew what each of us were doing, and we had more trust with each other. And so the second phase, we were still reviewing the Arabic, but it was less like at the level of that kind of level, and it was more really making sure it's translated into English, it communicates ideas, and that it's beautiful as well. Like it was kind of aesthetics, we got to that point. So yeah.
It's a very big question, and I don't know that I'll get to like the history of it or like sort of the broader, you know, like, yeah, just like outlining that kind of history. But to say that, you know, for Palestinians, that prisons are a site not only that represents, of course, like the you know, the imprisonment of our people, but also it's a site of like, it's a site for schools and like different like political thinkers, and also just like prisoners that like emerge out of their experience in prisons as prolific like intellectuals and like writers, and I think this is also the context in which this book comes out of. I know Wisam, you know, is like now a retired professor, but like I think that really formative like education in the prison is like what was able for him to write the novel, but then also to pursue coming out of that experience to be able to teach, you know, prison literature and just literature more broadly. I don't know if you want to build on that. No? Okay. I'm sure others come talk to us after and we can, yeah, speak more about this history.
Oh, then the fourth question, how did revolution, like how did what's our understanding of how revolutionary theory impacted the movement today? That's the question, right?
I think it was like about the break.
Break.
Yeah, how has the break impacted the movement?
How has the break impacted the movement? It's also a difficult question. I think one of the ways it's impacted the movement is that the broader movement, I'd say like the broader left outside of just the Palestinian national liberation movement, is that there's a absence of taking seriously Palestinian thought and theory, revolutionary theory, like in the struggle. It's not here, I feel like, and I think this is an attempt to remedy it, not just for the Palestinian diaspora, but for the broader left as well, and its invitation to take seriously Palestinian left thought and theory in the broader left in the US, in North America.
And maybe I can add to that. I mean, how many times have people read or discussed the history of Palestinian resistance, but haven't talked about the role of organized struggle, for example? And there's a lot of the severing is done in many ways, and part of it is by hiding things from the history books that are distributed through mainstream education, taking away the consciousness or the references that that people may need to understand how struggle actually developed. Like, struggle doesn't just come out of nowhere. Resistance doesn't just come out of nowhere. There's people and there's organizations and there's institutions that are behind them, that are pushing them forward, and that people are in and struggling with and together with. So, I mean, this book is so beautiful because there's no way to separate that from the story that he's telling. It's a story of a human being, but it's a story also of a political, organized struggle and what that means. And it can also give, like Kate was saying, you learn about the Gulf War, you learn about the historical events that he's going through, and it gives you a more human and relatable window into those histories. I don't know, I mean, you can read history and be inspired by it, and many people are, all of us are. We're all students of history, we're all students of theory. It's very inspiring. But then, how do we actually relate to it? And that's where the story of those revolutionaries and their process of being in those contexts and asking the question, how did they deal with the conditions that were around them, and what can we learn from that? Those are the things that help us relate to those histories in a way that we can actually take the lessons and apply it again. So I think this novel is able to do that in a really important way and can help bridge that gap. And also can help remedy some of the things that have been stolen from consciousness over the past couple of decades. The role of organization, but also the ideological vision for what struggle is actually going to lead us to. We're fighting for revolution and we're fighting for liberation. What does that actually mean? And I think this novel is a beautiful contribution to remedying that.
Thank you so much. I can say on the music part, after reading this book however many times, my Spotify day list, apparently I listen on Monday afternoons to Feiruz and Marcel Khalifa only. So I'm very excited to be able to congratulate. Do you guys have any closing remarks you want to make or final words? It's hard to close out such a big project.
I just hope that as you're reading through the novel, that all of the things that we spoke to, that and also what this moment requires of all of us is that to awaken this revolutionary within you and to remain committed to struggle, not in a, until graduation, until specific timelines, but to really push yourself and to grapple with your contradictions. And no matter how hard the conditions are, to really push yourself to remain committed to the convictions that I'm sure all of you hold around justice, freedom, and liberation. Yeah, I think that's it.
I guess I'm just echoing, but just to say it again, because repetition is good. Read it, read the book, read it more than once, read it with comrades, discuss it, debate it, share it, give it away after you've read it, make sure someone else read it. And also just get organized, go on the streets, join the movement. We're in such an important historical moment, and the decision to make here is, are we on the side of humanity, the side of Canaan, and all of the other human beings that are fighting for the future of all of humanity, or are we going to sit back? And so I know that many people are making that decision right now, and please use this book as a way to encourage everyone around you to join you. And we'll see you in the streets.
Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you all to coming. Just a couple of quick plugs. Oh yeah, get up, sure. But yes, a huge congratulations to the Palestinian Youth Movement for the process that we've all learned about now. I just want to also share an opportunity if you want to undertake the study of national liberation. The People's Forum is having a class called Marxism and National Liberation. We announced it today, so you should all sign up. And also that we have an action if you're in New York City on Sunday to get louder for Palestine. They've been trying to silence us in the streets, and we won't let them. So we hope to see you on Sunday, February 4th. Other than that, books at the front. Thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations to the Palestinian Youth Movement, and read the book with everyone else.